had me at cello, cello. You had me at cello. You had me at cello. Oh, you had me at cello. Good afternoon, everybody. It's 5 o'clock on a Friday. 5 o'clock on a Friday. That means it's time to practice. How much practice can we get in over a weekend? For some of us, I don't know, maybe 10 hours. Maybe it's just, maybe it's less than that, but hopefully more than what we were able to get in during the busy week. No distractions, just these nice long blocks of practice time. But there's no better way to kick off a practice marathon, a localized one even, than with some inspiration. So along these lines, I hope you've been checking out the new website, You Had Me at Cello, and we've got other projects going on at UW-Whitewater, such as the Cello Clinic on May 16th, focusing on the Popper etudes, which we're offering both as a virtual or an in-person option, so hopefully catering to whatever your preference is. But specifically 5 o'clock on a Friday, it's just my favorite time. I get to talk to other cellists about how they roll, how they bow, what makes them tick with the cello. And I'm totally thrilled today to have as our guest, Peter Thomas. Peter, how are you doing?
I'm well, thank you for having me. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Well, you are, in a way, I don't know if there's a show long enough to cover everything in your musical background. You are utterly the complete cellist in terms of the orchestral, the solo, the chamber music, the classical, the non-classical, the teaching, the writing, Suzuki, the summer camp in Italy. It would be a shorter list to figure what you don't do in music. But to turn the floor over to you for just can you introduce yourself to any and all viewers or listeners, just in a nutshell, who may not yet have all your, know you and have all your websites and links bookmarked. But hereafter, of course, they will.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Peter Thomas. Of course, I'm a cellist, and I grew up in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, the hometown of the American Suzuki Institute. So I was very familiar with the Suzuki program and do teach there every summer at the American Suzuki Institute on faculty. And this summer it will be a virtual festival, as is the music festival that I'll teach in Italy called the CLAZZ, which is a combination of classical and jazz influences, but it's really a lot of other things as well too. I'm a cellist in the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra. I have been there since 2008. I'm the professor of cello at Carthage College in Kenosha. I do also teach privately in my home studio here in Milwaukee, and I play in a plethora of different groups. Most notably, the string quartet that was formed a few years ago called the 414 Quartet. We took that area code and slapped it in front of our quartet and thought that was a cool idea. I also play in a piano trio at Carthage College, and we just called the Carthage Piano Trio. And I play with other groups in town like Frankly Music and Present Music, which is a new music ensemble. And really, when a gig comes your way, it's usually good to say yes. So I do a lot of performing around town as a classical cellist. But when I first joined the Milwaukee Symphony, I had an interesting opportunity to join also an indie rock band that toured extensively in the Midwest, not just as a four-piece, but really as an entire ensemble with backing high school orchestral arrangements that were done by my very good friend Jim Gray in Nashville, Tennessee. And the name of that group was called I'm Not a Pilot, and I learned a lot from the other side of music, what we would call the non-classical side. And my very first gig, I remember playing my really expensive cello, and I was in a smoky bar. That's when smoking was still allowed in Wisconsin, believe that. And I said, I can't bring this instrument to the bar anymore. I would much rather play on something that might not cost as much. And so I thought it would be a good idea to invest in a electric cello, or what they would technically call a silent cello. It's an instrument that doesn't create any sound, very much like an electric guitar, unless you plug it in. Of course, you can hear a little bit of sound that comes out, but it's unless you plug it in into an amplifier or to a PA system, you really don't hear much of it. So I purchased my electric cello at that point in 2010 and played at Summerfest. And I was immediately blown away by how easy it was to play loud. And I think as cellists, that's always something that we try to do, is to play loud and to be heard. And especially, playing in orchestra, it's always very hard to hear the low frequencies of the instrument. So I purchased the Yamaha SVC 210 SK electric cello and started playing around with that. And really it led me to other opportunities and other discoveries with the electric instrument, in which you can add lots of different pedals and things to what you're doing. And growing up in a family of church organists, my father and my mother, of course, the organ is an instrument that allows you to have many different types of sounds by pulling and pushing certain buttons in on the organ. And also there are 3 keyboards. There's a keyboard on top, keyboard in the middle, and then of course the foot keyboard on the bottom. And of course, that's exactly what I wanted to do as a cellist, was to use my feet as I play as well too. So pressing random different pedals at different times, creating different sounds, is kind of what I like to do. So I would consider myself to be a looping cellist. I have a looping station that allows me to create music by myself and to really be a one-man band. And so anyways, I started doing that and pairing my looping station and creating essentially string quartet parts and backing parts for me to play as I play a melodic content. I was using that in the band. I'm not a pilot. And I was also using it to do other gigs like weddings. You always have to contact a violinist or a violist or a string quartet for a wedding. And this way I was able to do it by myself. So I was creating backing parts for myself and playing on top of that. Really, the initiative that I wanted to talk about was something that started this last summer. And that initiative started out of the need for music. As you know, everything shut down in the middle of March, believe it or not, almost a year ago. And the Milwaukee Symphony stopped playing. All performing arts groups, all theater groups stopped performing and presenting to audiences due to COVID-19. And so the thought for me was to still somehow bring music to people in a way that was interesting. So it was a nice day on March 27th last year. It was like 70 degrees. Maybe we'll get there on March 27th this year. Anyways, I decided to take out my electric instrument and looping station, and I essentially played a concert for my neighbors on my driveway. And just so happened that somebody that was driving by worked for a television station in town and picked it up and said, there's this guy that's playing music and we haven't heard music in 2 weeks because of literally the entire world shutting down. And I don't know if you can recall that the very beginning, middle of March, should I say, the beginning of COVID, when we all had to quarantine, was pretty scary. Nobody even wanted to go outside or go to the grocery store and touch the apples, So I decided to play a concert, and after that concert, I decided to do more for my neighborhood and for my community, and 5 or 6 concerts. I don't even know how many concerts I played. Somebody said, you should do a music series out of this and call it something and try to do this in not just this community, but all over the place. And I said, it's a wonderful idea. So I grabbed my former bandmate, Steve Voras, who's an amazing drummer and graphic designer in Milwaukee, and we created a group called MusiConnect. And the idea is that with music, we can connect other people together, especially in such a divisive world as we had last year with our upcoming election and with the plethora of yard signs out in people's yards. I thought this would be a good way to bring community together instead of dividing them apart based off of their ideas. So that was what MusiConnect was all about. We played in over 25 different locations across the entire southeastern Wisconsin area, in Milwaukee, in different communities of Milwaukee, in communities that are not necessarily what you would consider to be cultured communities in some respects, or should I say in some underserved communities of Milwaukee. And I thought that that was very important work, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement, to be able to provide not just music to people that can afford it, but to people that can't, and to essentially give of myself and of the music that I can bring to all people of all ethnicities. So I'm doing that again this summer, and I'm ramping up to do another full-on schedule of not just me performing with Steve, my drummer, but also getting an entire lineup of different musicians from the Milwaukee Symphony and from the Milwaukee community to be able to perform in different, essentially driveways all over the entire state of southeastern Wisconsin. So actually, it kicks off tonight. It kicks off tonight. I'm performing a concert tonight, so that should be pretty cool. And I'm playing at Carthage College. It'll be a live stream this evening. So, anyways, that's kind of where I'm at. I try to just like Dr. Whitcomb said, I try to be as versatile as possible, and I try to spread the awareness of the arts in the community as much as I can.
Right. Your bio uses the term ambassador for music, and I like that. And music could sure use ambassadors. I mean, always can, but particularly now, I think it's safe to say.
Yeah.
So, Peter, what drew you to the cello in particular initially?
My older brother was a cellist, and so when I was a boy, he was having cello lessons. And when my mom asked me, what do I want to play? Of course, I said, I want to play what he plays, because I didn't know any other instrument that existed. But the reason why he chose it is because cello rhymes with jello, and he liked jello a lot. So essentially, that's how he chose it. And I just said I chose it because my older brother was doing it already. So yeah, what drew me to the instrument was literally my brother, and he was my inspiration growing up.
Well, okay, now that begs the question, do you like jello?
There's always room for jello.
Excellent. All right, so with your very, very busy performing schedule, regardless of what type of music you're performing and in what genre or ensemble, I mean, one thing that it's fun to talk about are ways to keep yourself healthy as a performer when you're practicing and playing as much as you are. But the focus of this particular series of interviews is motivation and inspiration and keeping yourself going. So on days where, I mean, I guess let's make this a two-part question. Do you ever have those days where you have to proactively motivate yourself? And if so, what do you do along those lines?
That's a good question. It really kind of depends on what's coming up in my schedule. So the motivation usually is a deadline. And deadlines creep up very quickly. Quartet concerts creep up quickly. Essentially anything that I'm doing with the electric cello can also creep up quickly. A lot of what I've been doing since COVID has been creating recordings for national conventions and for people that need music. And then, of course, I send stuff out, and that's an interesting way to bring music to people during this time. But really, the motivation, I think, for me is really to try to be as well-rounded as possible. Without playing in the orchestra on a week-to-week basis. The Milwaukee Symphony is doing a virtual season, and it started in January. But because we've had such a long time and a long break, I started experimenting with scordatura, which is the tuning of the instrument in different ways. So I had never learned the Kodai Sonata, and so I started learning the Kodai Sonata as a way of inspiring myself to do it and not to always have to retune back up or retune back down, just due to the daily grind of the Milwaukee Symphony job. So, of course, that was something that I was really interested in the beginning of the pandemic. I said, well, finally I get a chance to just keep my instrument in the same tuning. So I learned the Kodai Sonata, and then, of course, after that, I said, we might as well jump into the Bach Suite number 5 in C minor. So it was a really cool way for me to learn scordatura Bach, because the first time I learned it with the regular tuning and not scordatura. So it's like relearning how to ride a bicycle but you have a tricycle now. And so it's very difficult to learn it one way and then to try to learn it the other way, because your fingers naturally do what they want to do. And so that was a challenge for me. But I now have fingerings for the scordatura Bach and for the Bach that's just tuned A, D, G, C. So that was also something that I've been meaning on doing. Really, I think the thing that's been motivating me the most has been to continue to keep creating new songs and to keep creating new material to be able to play for my neighborhood and for the communities that I play for through MusiConnect. And so a lot of those types of things have been to essentially add different sounds to my electric cello setup. So about a couple of months ago, I got this really cool pedal that's called the Boss synthesizer pedal. And when you plug it into an electric cello, it does a lot of really cool things. And I wish I had my setup all set up here. I have a concert tonight, so all my stuff is packed up and already in the car. But the synthesizer pedal is a fairly new pedal by Boss. And it does a lot of things. It arpeggiates a certain note, and it's just really cool how many different sounds you can get from it. So I've been learning how to play pop songs that use a lot of piano synths. And so that's been very inspirational to me. I am doing a mashup of a song tonight that's by a really cool new band in Chicago called Drama. It's the synthesizer pop duo where there's a DJ and then a fantastic, unbelievable singer. And I'm mashing that song up with the Eurythmics' Sweet Dreams. And to be able to create both songs using this synthesizer pedal has been really, really cool for me. So my inspiration most of the time is coming from other groups and to try to recreate what they're doing on my electric setup to try to sound like that, or as much as I possibly can. I claim not to sound like most artists. My voice doesn't, have that type of register as a female vocalist, but I try. I'll put it that way. So, yeah.
Well, Peter, I think, so any of our viewers, for example, maybe I can make this into two questions. For some people, there is this fear factor that can creep in at something that seems daunting, not just a little bit new, but radically new. And I don't think you have any fear. For example, when the I'm Not a Pilot opportunity came along, you just rolled up your sleeves and you learned it. You embrace these new things. So, I mean, whether you've had to work towards that fearlessness, or if you have words of advice to help inspire people not to be afraid of going off in new areas, whether it's different genres of music that they're from what they're used to, or different ways of playing. Let me ask that question first, and then I'll do the follow-up.
Yeah, so I think I get your question, or at least I understand it. So it's the matter of being afraid, essentially, of putting yourself into a different situation, maybe a situation that you're uncomfortable with. And I think that's kind of the thing that we do as teachers, and that we always try to tell our students. It's the things that you do really well that you continue to keep doing when you're practicing. And it's the things that you don't do well that you neglect when you're practicing. And I think the impetus behind practicing is to practice things that you don't do well. So essentially, that is always a learning opportunity. I always want to continue to keep growing with the instrument. And the only way that I can grow is if I put myself in an uncomfortable situation. I still can't play Dvorak's Cello Concerto. And I'm scared. I'm scared of it. I've learned it, but I've never performed it because of that fear. Maybe one of these days I will, but it's so difficult and I am scared of it. So in certain respects, I do what I do well, right? I can loop myself and sing and all this other stuff. And maybe that deters people away from thinking that I can't do something that I can't, which is still to be able to play Dvorak's Cello Concerto. But I think the idea is, try your best, at least try to teach yourself how to play things. And if it's not absolutely perfect, well, nothing really is. I was always the type of player in orchestra that if there was something that scared me, I would, or a rest or something that like tricky counting passage, I would rather play something. Maybe I've changed my opinion since when I was a boy, but I used to always say, if you're going to screw up, do it loud and do it confidently, right? Maybe in an orchestra, that's not exactly what you want to do at this point, because if you do screw up, you're going to be loud and heard, and that's not a good situation. So maybe don't take my advice, but that's kind of how I grew up, is that if you can fail, and you're going to see a lot more failures than you're going to see successes. And I mean, for every success, there might be 10 to 50 to 100 different failures in which you don't feel as if you're doing something correctly, or that you're not satisfied with what you just did. You have to be able to give yourself that respect that you're learning, and that this is all a learning process. We are all, even the professors and the highest cellists and the highest musicians of the greatest stature, are all still learning how to play music and learning how to create it in a way that inspires them. Yeah. So I think that's the biggest thing that I can take away with music, is that it is always something that you'll continue to keep learning from. And what a cool job and what a cool career to be able to always constantly keep learning. I mean, that's the joy of it. Really is the inspiration behind it is to learn more, whether that's the history behind a composer who wrote something that you really like, or whether that's the recording that you really enjoy by this one string quartet or this one orchestra, or really this one indie pop group. Really, the joy of music is really to be immersed in it and to learn from it, so that it makes you a more human person. And humans do screw up. So it's totally okay to screw up and to be scared.
Super. Well, how about that? You ended up answering what was going to be my follow-up question too. And that has become an idée fixe in this series of interviews too, as far as the willingness to embrace a mistake and learn from it, or react, go with it in some cases. Like some jazz players just, okay, that's the new direction we're heading, apparently.
Right. And I think even with, a genre like jazz, in which if you go there, it's a mistake. I've learned that in improvising on the instrument, on the cello, that like a jazz musician, when you do make a mistake, do it again and again and again when you're improvising, and pretend as if you meant the first time to do it, because of the repetition of doing it over and over. So if you hit an E natural instead of an E flat, hit the E natural at least 3 more times to make sure that people know that this was right the first time and I'm making music and that this is jazz. So that's really it. There's a series of rules and foundations that we're taught as classical musicians that you have to follow. And I think it's really good to get out of that, to play off the script, to take your eyes off the stand and start playing with your heart. And a lot of people have music that they have naturally inside of them that they have never released. And I think it's really cool to be able to take yourself out of that situation. And if you have an idea, to be able to notate it or record it. And so I've been doing a lot of that as well too, is to be able to find different cool things that I can do on the cello and even on the piano and guitar. And I'm a very, very amateur guitar player and pianist, but to be able to bring different ideas from different instruments and incorporate that into your cello and vice versa. So it's really, you are your best teacher. You're your worst critic and your best teacher. So, yeah.
Spoken like a true music ambassador.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks so much, Peter. It's always fun talking with you. And viewers, next week you'll want to tune in for our guest will be Dr. Ann Witt. Some of the other people I've interviewed are doctor, but one of my mentees, so she's still Dr. Witt to me. Formerly of UT Austin and now of University of Alabama, a former president of American String Teachers Association, so you won't want to miss that. But in the meantime, happy practicing, and thank you again, Peter, and good luck with the concert and the rest of them this summer.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me. Take care, y'all.